One of the first steps in disassembling your Ybody steering column is to remove the original bracket and the original wire cover. The wire cover is held in place by two small Phillips. The bracket's held in place by 4 1/2-inch captured washer bolts. Once you have those off, you can actually move the wires out of the way, and if you have a steering column bracket holder, you can mount that and then put it in a vise. If you don't, you can actually remount the original bracket and put a piece of wood, just bolt it or screw it to it, and then you can put it in the vise and hold it that way. So the wire covers, there's actually two different versions. Early on they used metal, and then they switched to plastic at some point. I don't know when, but there is two different styles. So now we've got our column all mounted up in our vise, and if you don't have a vise, you can do this on a table. But one of the first things you do want to check before you start taking anything apart is to check and see if everything's working. In this situation, the lockout's working, the key is functioning, and my reverse lockout, which won't let me get my key out, is functioning, so I know that that's working. Another thing to check for before you start taking anything apart is to check the cam on the turn signal. In this situation, actually it's broke. I've only got one blinker working, and the flasher, it does feel like it's working, and I can tell it's original because it says flasher with an arrow and on. So the next step is to start taking things apart. The steering wheel, that's the first thing we're going to take off. There's 3 Phillips screws on the back of the steering wheel that will release the spoke cover. Once you have that out of the way, you'll have access to the horn. This is just a press-on fitting. You can remove that, and then you'll have 3 nuts to remove the steering wheel. Once you have those removed, you want to make sure that you have the wire for the horn disconnected. Then you can remove your steering wheel. To get the crush can off, you want to take a 3/4 inch socket and remove the nut that's inside there. Now, it helps to do this if you do it with the steering locked in position, the lockout. And getting to this crush can is actually going to give us an opportunity to see our first of many date codes. So you'll see right on the outside of the lip here, we've got our first date. This was 8/14 of 1969, so that assures us that this is a 1970 column. So now that I have that nut off, I'm going to get a steering wheel puller, and I'm actually going to attach it inside there and pull this crush can off. The steering wheel puller is now in place. If you don't have a steering wheel puller, you could possibly rent one from your local auto parts store, or they might even loan you one. But whatever you do, do not put your screwdriver in there and start prying. If you do, you could end up with a crush can that looks like this, and that's no good to anybody. So once we remove this crush can, this is going to be a good time to inspect the wire. There's a wire inside here. You want to make sure that it's not shorting out or have any wear spots that's showing wire. On the back side here, we're going to clean this up later and re-expose all new brand new metal, because that's where your horn wheel rides on. So next we're going to remove this retaining plate in here. It's held on by 3 Phillips screws. This plate holds the turn signal switch, and once you remove that, you'll be able to take that out. One of the things I want to show you is that these turn signal switches, I talked about it earlier, they have different flash lettering on them, and so this is a reproduction one, and if you could see, this one says hazard, has a little arrow on it. And one of the other things that you'll notice is I talked about this horn wheel. That horn wheel, it rides on this copper ring on the crush can so that you have constant power to be able to use your horn. On the reproductions, this is just a spring-loaded non-wheel. It would be just like a point that makes contact, so it could wear out. I prefer to build these using new old stock ones that actually still use the wheel. And you can still get some of these. I've gotten quite a few of them from David at Roseville Mopar Parts. He's in Detroit, and they had some of these. This one was, I think, from 1974. And so sometimes you can call your local dealer and get those type of parts, and it's worth checking in and seeing if you can get them. Another thing, so now that I've got this plate, this retaining plate removed, it's a little tricky to get them out. Sometimes you have to take the screw all the way out. So that's what the plate looks like. And you've got also one screw in here that holds the turn signal lever on. And you take that out, and it's actually going to unscrew the turn signal lever. And so I always put the screw back in so I don't lose it. But what you'll notice is that this is an Ybody turn signal 1970. We talked about this early on. This has a satin finish. And if you were to look at a 71 and up, it's going to be a chrome finish. And so you'll also notice that the chrome finish in 71, this is actually, I think this is B-body, but it's also got a different bend to it on E-body. And up until recently, nobody's reproduced a correct E-body turn signal lever. Tony DiAgostino at Tony's Mopar Parts has started producing one. It is chrome, so if you want it to be correct for 70, you could just scuff it and give it a little bit of a satin look. So now we've got our wiring out, our turn signal switch out, and all you want to do is just feed the wire all the way up and through, and you'll be able to take this all the way out and set it out of the way. If you had an A01 light package, you would have this internal lamp built into the column. So this key lamp has a little light bulb inside there, and then it lights this up. Another thing I wanted to show you is on these ignition switches. This is the original one that we just took out of this E-body steering column. And if you look on it, it has an arrow, and the arrow is pointing away from the column. So to turn the flasher on, you pull the flasher out and push it in to turn it off. Well, some of the new old stock ones, you'll think that they're the same, but this is actually for a B-body. You pull it out to turn it off, and you see that arrow pushes in to turn it on. So this is a 71, and you can see the size difference in the width. It's much fatter than the 70, and this is a reproduction. This is one from a reproduction company that makes them, and it functions correctly. Again, it's like the fat 71 and up. We can make any of these work. So what's correct for E-body? It's the arrow, flasher on, pulling it away for 1970, and in 71, it goes to the fatter flasher, and it still pulls away. So if you haven't already done so, there's a coupler on the end of this, and if you still have it on there, this is a good time to take it off, because we're going to be taking this housing off next, and it's going to take this shaft with it, so we don't want this coupler on. And all you have to do is take a screwdriver and get under here, and you can just lift these tabs and release this plate. And it's a metal plate, and if you get these off, you'll notice that underneath here is a black boot. And that boot is just a grease seal. And that grease seal is always black on originals. And a lot of the reproductions are orange, but now they're making black ones again. So if you do your homework and research, you can look around and find an actual black one, and it looks much better when you look in the engine bay and see that correct black boot on top of there. So that's the next step. Just take these tabs and bend it up and take it off. Get into there. And because we're not going to reuse that, we won't need that. Now inside here, you'll feel on one side, and there's a small little pin. And you'll see, if you clean up some of this grease, maybe you can get in here and see, there's the pin right there. And on the inside, it's sticking in quite a bit. And the goal of that pin is to stop this from ever coming off. In case something was to happen and the steering column was to move forward, it actually won't disengage. Okay, so to get this little pin out, there's a couple different ways, but I've been able to just put a big pair of pliers on them and just push, and it comes right out. And you don't need to take it all the way out, you just have to take it far enough to clear. Now, these shoes in here ride on a pin, and I always put new shoes in, so we're not going to reuse these. and so we can get rid of them. And then there's also a little shoe holder, this little metal piece. We'll also replace that. So we're going to pack this all with brand new grease, new shoes, new shoe holder. Everything's going to work better than new. So that's how you get the end of that coupler off. And you want to make sure you don't lose that little pin. That little pin is very important because you want to make sure it's back in place when you put this back together. So now the last thing down here that you want to remove is this cover, and you just slide it over. It stretches. If it's an original one, it might tear, but we're going to replace that, so don't worry about it. We'll set that aside. And now let's get back to the front of our column here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take off 3 screws. These 3 screws hold this collar on, and we're going to take those out. But there's also one more thing on that steering shaft that we have to remove, and it's held in place with a little clip right here. So you take some of these retaining ring pliers and you take that off. There's 2 little holes, allow you just to get in there and spread that. I put a nut on the end here, and all I had to do was just hold this and give it a few taps, and it came right off. But the correct way to remove the upper steering column shaft bearing is to use a tool called the Miller C4044. And you can find that tool on eBay, sometimes used, or you can make one yourself. The reason why you want to use that tool is there's 2 pins inside the steering shaft that if you hit it hard enough will collapse. It's designed to do that in an accident. So if you haven't done this before, it might be better to grab the tool and use that. Or if you feel comfortable, just give it a light tap. This is really cool. This is another date code that we can look at. Now sometimes you'll see a pie wheel. This one's really cool actually. Has a 69 up there. And each one of these dashes, this is the first time I've seen this style, it is equal to a month. So they have dots in here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's 1 month, 2 month, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the first week of the 8th month in 1969. That tells me when this was cast. We've got a bearing in here. We're going to punch that out a little later. Probably just use a socket, or actually I'll just push it with my thumb. And so this surface, when we go to paint it, we're going to protect that. We don't want to paint that, and we're going to replace that bearing. So we're going to set this aside for now. So there's another retaining C-clip right here. I can just take 2 screwdrivers and press on each end. And turn a little bit so you can see that. And if you just pry it, you'll be able to take it off and get it out of the way. Then after that, the next thing you want to take off is there's a little cover right here that hides a pin. And if you just get behind, see, if you get behind this, right like this, you can take this little collet off, and inside there is a little pin. And all you need to do is drive that pin out, and that will allow this gear to come out, just like that. And so with that out of the way, we can take this little gear off, and we're going to clean that all up. Now I can get that shaft out of the way. Okay, so the next thing we're going to take out is this lockout plate that holds the pin. And one of the things I want to tell you that I forgot to say earlier is I do put these screws back in their original spots so I remember where they go. You can bag them and label them really well. That's another option. But do something so you can mark them and replace them back in their original location. So let's go ahead and get this plate out of the way. And this is just held on by 2 Phillips screws. And once you have this out of the way, there's going to be a little spring-loaded mechanism behind there that is operated by this ignition key. So you can see that whenever this is moved, that this thing will function to lock out the steering wheel. So let's go ahead and take the ignition out next. This has 3 Phillips heads, and you take this out before you take the key ignition switch out. Now this is going to be the wires that are dangling down. And one thing on these columns they have is a key buzzer switch. And that key buzzer switch is 2 red wires that are right here. And oftentimes you're going to have to reuse this when you get a new ignition switch. These usually don't come with it. So I'll show you how to pop those out and reuse them. But you also want to make sure that you disconnect those before you pull that wiring harness out. They're held in place by 2 Phillips head screws. And what's really neat about this is you're going to see here in a second that this is also another item that is date coded. This has, and it's way cool the way they did it. They burnt it into the plastic. So, see if I can show you here. You probably won't be able to zoom in enough to see it, but I can make it out. This one is the 272nd day of 1969, and I'll try to post a photo right now so you can see that. But that's really cool how they did that. They even date coded that little switch. So we can go ahead now and pull this wiring harness out, and it just slides right on out through that hole, and we'll set that on the table because we're going to replace that with a brand new wiring harness. So now the next thing we can take out is that spring-loaded lockout mechanism, and this is something that it's a really good idea to take some photos because this confuses a lot of people. I get a lot of questions about how does that go back together, and it is kind of tricky, but we'll take it apart later and re-grease it and get it all lined back up. So now we can take these final screws out. It'll take this last piece of this collar out, but I want to go ahead and take this ignition switch out right now. So I'll show you how to do that. To remove the key cylinder, you want to locate this small hole. Get yourself a screwdriver or even a small nail will work. Make sure you remove the key and then push on a spring-loaded lock in there. And once you find it, you'll be able to pull the cylinder out. That's the lock you're looking for. And the reason why you want to have the key out is because when the key is in, you'll see it actually activates a lever. That lever is your key buzzer lever that activates that switch right there. So make sure you got the key out. Right through there, you put your nail or screwdriver and then pull it out. Now, the next thing to remove is there is some 5/16 bolts right down here at the bottom. And you can go ahead and take those out. There's 4. All right, so now we got this off. And this one is also date coded, and this uses a little bit different. It uses a bar system. So there's sometimes you'll see a pie, sometimes you'll see this bar system, but up on top here, you'll see a 69, and then each one of these boxes is a month, and every one of those dots is a week. So you can count up and figure out when this was actually cast. So another cool date code. And then if you were to look inside here, there's a bunch of bars, and they each have a dot inside there. And this one says 69, and it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that tells me it's the 8th month of 69 when it was cast. Now to remove this from the lockout tube, there's actually an Allen inside here, and there's an access hole. You just reach in there and take that little Allen out. And then you have to take a punch, and these little tabs are folded over. So you just have to release them a little bit, not very much, and they'll come right out. So when you got this released, this should separate from the lockout tube. Now you're going to have a wavy washer in here that keeps pressure on it so it spins smoothly. So we're going to set that right back in its spot. And now we're going to be able to take out the lockout tube. And to do that, there's a little spring right here that holds the bearing. We take that out, set it aside, and we can pull this lockout tube out. And you notice there's a bearing down here. Now this is a full bearing, it's one piece, so the only way to get this off is to take it all the way out. So if you have a problem with this bearing, you have to take this steering column all the way down. So what they did was they figured a workaround. They sell now a 2-piece bearing that you can actually take off and put on without having to take the whole steering column apart. So, but we're going to restore this, and we're going to straighten this out and make this look like brand new. And the last thing that we got to do here is we've just got to remove the plate right here. It has 2 half-inch bolts that are holding it together. And inside there, there's a rubber O-ring. And that O-ring is kind of a seal, so it doesn't let any water in. And so we're going to inspect that. And I'm not sure if they're reproducing that or not. I've been able to get a hold of some new old stock. If you have to, just take it out, clean it up, and reuse it. Another thing that you didn't see when I took out that lockout tube, because it was disintegrated, was there was originally a dust cover. It was a foam dust ring, and you can see the remnants of it right here. And that actually, just when this was installed, that would keep all the dust from coming up the column. So we're going to make a new one of those. The last new old stock that I have was so rough, you touched it, it would basically just fall to dust. So now we're going to take that bottom plate out. We'll fix that up and straighten it up later. And the very last piece here is this O-ring collar. And you can see this O-ring's kind of messed up, so I'm going to replace that with a new O-ring, but that's the rubber grommet in there. So that's it. We're all done. We got our steering column all cleaned up, ready to go. There is one other thing actually that I need to take out, and that's the piece that the wavy washer sits on. There's a little metal shelf in there, and I'll show you how to take that off here. Okay, so to get this little washer out that's actually sitting on a couple of these bent-in tabs in there, I get a 1.25 inch socket, and I just make an extension out of it, and I slide it up through the bottom, and all I have to do is just tap it a little bit, and that's going to come right out. Now you should take a picture of it so you know how it sits back in there. I'll show you later on in the video exactly how it sits, but we're going to clean that up and re-grease this, and we're going to do that after we paint it. So that's it for now. Let's get everything cleaned up, and we'll move on to restoring the parts and getting them into the correct paint and finish.